Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of You're My Comms Hero, a brand new podcast for Comms Hero types and people that I'm inspired by in the comms work that they do. So today we're going to hear from Elaine Needham, who's the Director of Marketing at Aspire Housing, and we're going to find out about how internal and external comms has been delivered more recently during this COVID-19 period. So thanks very much, Elaine, for joining us and being one amongst our first guests on the You're My Comms Hero podcast. And what I'd like to do just to kick things off is just for you to have an opportunity to just introduce yourself and your role at Aspire Housing.
Thanks, Asif. Well, thanks for inviting me. I'm really pleased to be here talking to you today. I joined We Are Aspire about 3 years ago now as their comms lead, and it was my first venture into housing. So previously I've worked in IT for a number of years. So my role is a group role. So I look after the marketing comms across our housing business, Aspire Housing, our training business, PM Training, and our charity Realise. So it's a varied role, and there's always lots to get involved with.
Excellent. So we've had a conversation in advance, Elaine, and there's so much that's happened in this kind of last 5-6 months during COVID, and there's a fascinating story in there that to share, and lots of things that people will, I'm sure, benefit from your experience as an experienced comms professional. So in terms of your comms plan, how has that changed and adapted since lockdown was announced back in March, which does seem such a long time ago now?
Oh, doesn't it? Yeah, it seems a time ago. A lot's happened since March. I think from an internal communications point of view, we've introduced new things since lockdown. So our exec team have been doing weekly blogs, which we post online, which are personal updates and updates about the business. We've introduced team huddles so that colleagues across the business get to see each other virtually. We've introduced a new weekly bulletin, which gets emailed to colleagues each week, which really gives a comprehensive update from across the business. Given that so much change has happened and we've had to keep up to date with changing government advice, these things will help to keep colleagues not just in touch with each other, but in touch with the business updates. We've also hosted live executive Q&A sessions online, where colleagues have been invited to ask the executive any questions they would like, which has really kept the executive team visible to colleagues during a time when sometimes people aren't seeing anybody apart from their family. However, having said that, we are looking at all the tools we now use from an internal communications point of view. We currently use a messaging service, Yammer, internally to talk to each other. We have an intranet as kind of an information hub. We use Microsoft Teams to communicate with each other. And it's now looking at how we use all of those and whether they're still right and fit for purpose given where we are now, to really offer colleagues a choice of how they consume their information, how we keep them up to date. From an external communications point of view, we've always tried to take quite an integrated approach, considering customers' behaviours and preferences, so how they like to consume their information. Do they like to go online? Do they interact with our social media, or are they not really online and prefer to get things by post? So we've always tried to take that approach. I think kind of during lockdown periods, we've definitely upped the amount of communication that we send to customers and stakeholders, again to share business updates and information that undoubtedly affected them during that time. And again, I think some of that will stay. We have increased the amount of direct mail we do. We still continue to do a lot of e-direct mail and online, whether that's via website and social. So we're certainly looking at the mix of tools we use to communicate with customers.
Yeah. So would you say then the one thing I picked up there, Elaine, was the frequency of messaging? Has that increased?
Certainly during lockdown, direct messaging to customers has. So we've had regular, almost brochures going out, kind of 4-page, 6-page brochures going out, which has contained updates across the business to our housing team. And then to our training business, it's been more online and email for those type of customers. But again, the frequency has increased. And I think that's generally because the amount of information that we've needed to share, that's affected them, which hasn't always been the case pre-COVID, I think.
Yeah. And from an internal comms point of view, you mentioned weekly vlogs, the team huddles, the weekly bulletins, and also the live exec Q&As. and you said some of those things might stay. Do you think will that frequency? Do you think it's sustainable to continue that when it's post-COVID?
I think sustaining it isn't the issue. I think are we giving colleagues channel overload? I think is the issue. Yeah. I think we need to be really conscious of that. I think we certainly in the early days of lockdown saw email fatigue when you just constantly at a screen, constantly scrolling through emails. Yeah. And I think it's balancing that. So that's why we've got the internal communications review underway, really, to hint colleagues which channels they prefer, what frequency is right for them. I think we've had an awful lot to tell colleagues in a timely manner during lockdown. I think that may lessen as we go forward, but I think the tools are still there. I just think it's then gauging what frequency is right. Yeah. So an example of that would be the weekly bulletin that has stayed, but it's moved to monthly because it seems about the right frequency to
Yeah, and it's interesting you mentioned there the certainly from a frequency adaptation, but also the communications preferences, which traditionally is reserved for customer communications preferences. So, and it's interesting when I was interviewing Steve Hayes for the You're My CommsHero podcast as well, he said a similar thing in terms of they're looking at the way that they're speaking to and the information that they're collecting from colleagues. So it seems that has changed because I think that just purely because of the nature of COVID. You mentioned the access and visibility to the execs from the live Q&A. Do you think there's an opportunity here or a realization that will those execs or execs in general being on social make them more accessible, not just necessarily during a crisis as we've had here? Do you think there's any benefit to having those execs in that kind of accessible environment for communicating some of those messages in an authentic way and trying to really keep the BAU, the business as usual element going?
Yeah, absolutely, undoubtedly. I mean, I think our exec team have always been very visible. They recently, before lockdown, we had an office move around, and they moved to become centre of the office workspace that we had. And I think that's just moving that now into a virtual world. So whether it's in an online presence through a blog, sharing that through our internal social media channel, and then external social, I think absolutely.
Okay, and I know within housing, there's over the years I've been involved with housing comms for probably 15, 16 years now, and there's been a huge shift towards digital transformation. But it was interesting you mentioned an integrated marketing approach. If you had to put percentages on digital to non-digital traditional forms of media like print and what have you, what would you say that would be for Aspire?
I think that's really tricky. That massively varies dependent on our business between Aspire Housing, PM Training and Realise Charity. I think what we always try to do for each type of campaign, take an integrated approach, so have different assets across online and offline for that campaign, so that you are kind of reiterating the message in a number of different ways, in a consistent way. There's absolutely a place for print, I think. It just depends on what the point of doing the work is and what the best way to deliver that, I think. Obviously, the benefit of digital is the beauty of being able to track everything and get some metrics behind it, but that's not always what the point of the campaign. Sometimes it's something different, whether it's something personal or a different motive for doing the work.
Yeah, and you mentioned, as we're talking about print, you did something quite innovative with in terms of internal comms and communicating with colleagues. Can you tell us more about the pack that you sent out and why you chose print for that particular message?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think COVID brought challenging times for everybody, whether you were a frontline worker or you were somebody behind the scenes. I think it was a really challenging time, and I think what we wanted to do was not only to thank colleagues for the exceptional work that was continued during the lockdown times, but also show some appreciation and the fact that when people were returning to work, that things had changed. So the way in which we work had changed due to COVID secure measures, and we wanted to assure people that support was there in whatever way they needed it, and informative information to help them as they return to work, to support the new COVID secure ways of working. So the reason we chose print for that is because as a person, I think you still like getting something through the post. I think you get lots of emails and they are absolutely fine, they serve a purpose, but I don't think there's anything better than receiving a handwritten card or receiving a little gift through the post. And I think that was the value of this campaign. It's part of something wider, the Feel Good campaign, which we have internally, where we share a variety of direct mail and e-direct mail assets and vouchers and assets which managers can use to share with colleagues. So it was important we chose print for this particular piece, definitely.
Yeah, and I saw the one of the key things with that was certainly on social for everyone to see was the engagement that it created. And we've looked at some of those. So there were some great tweets and what have you from people who received as a comms hero yourself and having to be at the development arm of that campaign. That's kind of the ideal scenario in terms of how do you measure success on these kinds of things. Tell us more about how you felt when you see those social posts where a campaign you've put together with your team has landed and then starts to actually create engagement and interaction.
Yeah, I think it's there's nothing better, is there? I mean, I think this was an initiative from our HR team in conjunction with the comms team, and I think what they wanted to do was to share some of that thanks and some of that appreciation. To see that online is really nice. So we had a number of colleagues post across Facebook, Twitter, our own internal Yammer, LinkedIn, to share the fact that they were happy that they received it. And it showed that they were appreciated, and I think everybody wants a little bit of that.
Yeah.
Person. It is difficult from a marketing point of view. It's difficult to kind of judge the overall reach and engagement of it. But just an example, one Twitter post we know reached over 3,000 people.
Wow.
I think it was 362 engaged with it. So we know that it went long and far. But I think the benefit of seeing colleagues share their happiness was the point of it, really.
Yeah, and that message, I noticed on some of those posts that the people were actively tagging in Sinead Butters, the CEO of Aspire Housing as well, which from her perspective, that must be great. She's scrolling through a timeline where all these notifications popping up. Well, comms heroes are doing their job, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have a philosophy, a way of working across We Aspire, which is people first, and that's about putting, people, whether that's customers or colleagues, first. And I think this is just one of those instances where she could see it in action, I guess.
Yeah, and you certainly did a brave thing in terms of print here. You used personalised print. So were there any? Do you think that made some difference, and were there any concerns about having data used in your campaigns? Because we've talked, I know you're a big fan of using data, so it'd be good to hear some of your experiences of why you chose that personalization and the role that data plays in comms and marketing.
Yeah, definitely. I think as much as we like to receive something through the post or receive something to us, I think targeting to you as a person is the most important thing. And in this way, we just touched on the name. And yes, you've got to be sure of your data, because you don't want any typos in there. That would not look good. Yeah. So you've got to be sure of the data. But I think the power of that and the benefit of that is the engagement that you get from those pieces. So I think if I receive something, I know it's personalised to my likes, my interests, my name, I'm much more likely to engage with that, tell somebody about it, do something with it, whatever that call to action might be, than if it's something more generic and it doesn't talk to me. So I think the comms piece is all about, how it's written to me and not generally, and what it's about, and have they really tapped into what I'm interested in, and therefore am I going to engage with it? So yeah, I'm a big fan of that.
Yeah. Do you think that you'll utilise personalisation more in the campaigns, whether they're digital or print ones, in the future?
Yeah, definitely. And that's about personalisation through behaviours and preferences. So if we can really understand our colleagues and our customers in terms of what they like, how they like to do it, whether they engage online, whether they engage via whichever channel, and what their interests are, we can then tailor campaigns specifically to them. And that's where your targeting and your segmentation and all of that really comes in. And I think that's what marketing comms is all about. It's about being able to provide the best customer experience these days. It's about it's about sparking those emotions and the engagement. It's less about product and price anymore and promotion. It's about those engagement factors. And I think that's what personalisation can certainly do.
Yeah, excellent. And just to what advice? It's been you're an experienced comms professional. You've gone through all the things that most comms people have had to go through since March this year through COVID. What advice would you give to other CommsHero people and professionals for their plans for the year ahead?
That's a tricky one. I think it has been a really busy time for comms people, as it has been for many others over the last few months. And I don't think we thought we'd be in this position at the start of the year. But I think what we're looking at, certainly from our point of view, is we're going back to our strategies to understand what is it we're trying to achieve, and are those things still right for our colleagues and our customers in terms of the campaigns that we want to deliver. And then when we do understand if those objectives are still right, what plans have we got in place? And I think we need to realise that those plans might not be the same as what we've done before. I think there'll be more of a constant review of those to make sure the channels we use, the tools we use, the campaigns we use are right. It's going to be a very tough time for many in the next few months. And so I think we need to be very aware of those conditions that we're kind of operating in and be mindful of it. So I think for us, it always comes back to the customer, doesn't it, and understanding them.
Yeah.
And if you continue to do that and keep a close eye on that, then I think the communications will follow.
Yeah. So we've got a couple of final points here, Elaine. If in terms of where I'm interviewing you here as one of my comms heroes, somebody I'm inspired by in the work that you and your organisation does, have you got any comms heroes that you are inspired by out there, and if there's any that you'd like to mention?
Oh, that's a really tough one. I think there's so many different things. I think from a marketing point of view, I think there's some great social threads out there. I love it where they really show their personality through the social. So I think Innocent is one of those I always come back to.
Yeah.
Really good personality behind their brand. But then if you look at some of the council threads, they're really starting to get that through theirs, and that's always been a sector that's traditionally been, I'd say, seen to have less of a flair from a comms.
Yeah.
It's all changing now. Who else is CommsHero? I think it goes back to some business leaders as well in terms of how they share their vision with their colleagues and their staff to show what it is they want to achieve, and then how those pan out from a comms point of view. So I guess you've always got the kind of Rich and Bransons and the Virgins in terms of where they started, where they are now. Not so great from an Atlantic point of view, but I think what they've brought to life, I think some of those big ones, let's go back to them.
I think that's the Virgin one's always a marketing textbook. I've seen that in many CIM textbooks, but that was from quite a few years ago. I think those texts will have changed somewhat now, as an Innocent and the likes of that. Just with the whole communication channels that are available now, digital's had a massive part to play in the fact that people can have personality now, and the brands like Innocent can do what they do and engage far more than just outbound comms, really, that leads to a transaction. There's far more interaction before an actual transaction, if indeed you get a transaction. It's not really that's not the final motivation, or it certainly doesn't appear to be that way with Innocent, although it does have a direct influence on that. So no, that's great that you've shared some of those, and the councils, local government has changed dramatically. I know 3 years ago we had a couple of the team from Doncaster Council who are probably kind of leading in that respect, and the ones that people think about. And we've got in CommsHero Week on 28th September, we've got Cheltenham Borough Council with Darren Knight and Katie Sandy, who did quite a probably Doncaster-esque type campaign, actually. And it's an interesting title they've got, and it's all there on our website. But it's great to hear. And so just wanted to thank you, Elaine, for your time and what was a very interesting interview, lots of insight and some hopefully many points and tips that people can take away and start using in their work and their role. as well. And just a reminder to all the listeners that CommsHero Week is happening on the 28th of September through to the 2nd of October. And it's a virtual event with over 35 speakers, 3 panel debates and lots of networking opportunities. And we had confirmation today that CIPR recognised it for 175 points for the whole week, so 35 sessions at 5 points a session. And apparently your annual CPD requirement's 60 points. So you can't get 3 years in advance, but you can certainly get a whole year's worth of CPD in a week. And so if anyone's interested, tickets and further details on the website commshero.com, or you can be one of over 10,000 followers on Twitter. So Elaine, it just remains for me to say thank you very much for your time, and we'll be launching this podcast on the website in the coming days, and we'll look forward to hopefully you being part of CommsHero Week and the listeners enjoying your tips and pearls of wisdom that you've shared with us today.
Thanks very much. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.